Is it possible for Donald Trump to achieve the impossible, to win the Commonwealth of Virginia? So many Republican early voters are trying to make that happen. For more on that subject, I want to turn now to Christian Heiens. He's a political analyst and election modeler. Additionally, he's the co-host of the Making the Argument podcast, where you certainly can hear more about this as well. Christian, good to talk to you today, sir.
Thanks for having me on.
This is a fun topic, early voting in Virginia. I do see a lot of polling that suggests that Virginia is out of reach for Republicans. In fact, I spoke to J.D. Vance on Monday of this week, and he told us that he said it's definitely going to be more difficult in Virginia, but he thinks it's possible. How do you score it?
I'm probably in the same camp as him. Harris is definitely favored, but I will say from what I'm seeing in terms of early voting and the modeling that I've been building since 2019 that accurately predicted Youngkin's victory within 0.05% of the final result, what I'm seeing right now suggests that Virginia is going to be a lot closer than it was in 2020.
How close could it be, do you think? I mean, I know that's hard to predict, but it seems, that we are seeing a lot of Republican enthusiasm in the Commonwealth.
So my modeling right now, which I haven't publicly released yet, so your viewers get a bit of a sneak peek here, has Harris winning by between 5 and 6.
Okay.
But it's based on a couple things that haven't yet been solidified because we're still relatively early in the early vote process. I will say if turnout ends up looking like 2023 or 2021, where Republicans have a good election day turnout, in addition to where they're at right now with early voting, the model technically says that it's not outside the realm of possibility for this race to be decided by quite literally a single point. But that would be weighing everything in favor of the Republicans right now.
Now, help me understand this, because if you're relying on sort of election day turnout being similar to those timeframes, one thing that I imagine has to be happening is that Republicans are at the moment sort of cannibalizing the normal election day turnout because so many Republicans are choosing instead to opt for early voting, right?
So obviously both sides are cannibalizing their election day vote because 4 out of 4 voters, these are people that showed up in 2023, 22, 21, and 20. They're voting early, but what's important to note is where Republicans are getting more of their early vote from compared to Democrats. My model right now actually has Republicans outright beating Democrats when it comes to 0 out of 4 voters. So these are voters that are either newly registered, many times they're kids in their 20s or late teens, or they're voters that quite literally have not shown up in any of the last 4 election cycles in Virginia. And Republicans are beating them in early voting. We shouldn't even be close with this demographic right now. And I think it really suggests that the early vote network that, Governor Youngkin has really been pushing has been successful in targeting low propensity voters, which should help us on election day rather than hurt us.
Would you give me a sense of what Virginia early voting trends look like? Because I think the audience is interested in how do we know that it's Republicans who are turning out and not just a mix of Democrats and Republicans at equal rates?
So that's what I've been spending the last 5 years building a model for. I started this actually with the Freitas congressional campaign in 2020 for the federal elections. I previously did this for the state legislature for the House of Delegates in 2019. But what we've been seeing here is that the early vote breakdown is significantly redder than it was even in 2021. To give you an idea, my same model that I used to accurately predict Youngkin's victory in 2021 shows that on this day in 2021, Democrats were leading about 65-35 in the early vote. And as of this morning, they're currently only leading 59-40. So again, Republicans are over 40% in terms of the early vote, and this is unprecedented. They've never been this close before in any of the last 4 cycles.
And when you say that these are Republicans who are voting, is this based on very red districts in the state? How do we know a Republican voter has cast a ballot?
So it's based on a combination of demographics, locality, voting history. So you can look at things like, primary voting records. And it's also based on backtracking this same model that I'm running this cycle to previous cycles to make sure that it actually aligns up with how we know the early vote actually ended up breaking down between Democrats and Republicans. When you put all of those metrics together, you end up getting a model that's relatively accurate.
How are the blue districts doing right now, like the Fairfax counties and the Loudoun counties? What are you seeing in their turnouts?
So turnout in Northern Virginia is currently down compared to parts of the rest of the state. So you're thinking like Shenandoah Valley, South Side, Central Virginia, where I'm located in Culpeper. But it's worth noting that, Democrats have talked about how, they're going to have more polling stations opening up in places like Fairfax, which will happen. But again, when you look at where we are now versus where we were in previous cycles, they had the same exact problem, right, where they needed new polling stations opening up. It's not that that's really going to change things dramatically any more than we're already expecting to. It's more about where they are right now versus where they were in previous cycles, even absent of new polling stations opening up. They're in a much rougher position than they were 4 years ago, or even where they were last year when they flipped the legislature. So I think that's where some of the panic is coming from. It's not necessarily, we need new polling stations, because they always get those. I think it's more of a panic of looking at where they are right now compared to where they were in previous cycles.
Among the Republican early vote that you're watching, was it front-loaded at all? Meaning, did Republicans show up in the very first days of early voting, get their ballots out, and then we began to peter off, or are the trends holding?
Yes, that always happens. So this has been a reoccurring trend going all the way back to 2021, that every year Republicans start off relatively strong, with the exception of the 2022 midterm cycle. And then they end up losing ground as new polling sites open up, as Democrats start voting by mail. That typically comes in a little bit later than voting in person. Although it's worth noting that once you get into mid-October, like we are right now, you end up seeing a reversal of that trend, where the Democrats start losing steam and Republicans start gaining ground again. This is what famously happened in 2021. In fact, it was actually just 3 days ago in 2021 marked the anniversary of Democrats peaking in terms of early voting. And every subsequent day past that, it wasn't like a straight drop down for them, but they never again recovered their advantage that they had established in early October. So at the moment, it seems like that it's moving in that direction, but we need more data before we can draw hard conclusions about that.
So we're going to have obviously more data with each passing day. How important are the next 2 weeks, let's say, to your models?
The next 2 weeks are going to be entirely what builds this model. Once I release this model, it'll probably be after October 21st. It's going to be leaning heavily on what's going to happen in the next 10 to 14 days. If Republicans keep up the momentum that we've seen the last 48 hours, with them voting early and actually eroding the Democrat margins, then we have to start having a serious conversation about whether or not Virginia is actually in play. If they don't, or if Democrats start rallying again and actually regain some of the ground that they've lost recently, then again, we're probably looking more at like a Harris plus 5 to 8 range for the final outcome in Virginia.
Obviously, every state's going to have a different campaign apparatus trying to get out the vote, and some of them will be more effective than others. But it does feel like that a lot of the trends we might see in Virginia could be duplicated all across the country, given the mood of the country. How much of a bellwether do you think Virginia is, especially if Trump achieves a victory here? What does that tell us about the rest of the country?
If Trump achieves a victory here, then you are looking at a blowout. You're looking at him winning virtually every single swing state in the country and potentially picking off one of either Minnesota or New Hampshire as an additional upset. Now, if he just comes close, right, if he comes within 6 points or even within 7 points, honestly, my money would still be on Trump at that point, right? I mean, because that would represent a 3 or 4 point shift to the right versus 2020, to go back to what you said about whether or not Virginia could be a bellwether. So quite frankly, I think that it doesn't even matter if Trump ultimately wins the Commonwealth. If he improves by 3 or 4 points, that's going to resonate in states like North Carolina that have very similar demographics to Virginia. It might play out in Pennsylvania as well, especially if you see fewer turnout and Democrat strongholds like Philadelphia. So I think what happens in Virginia is actually crucial to the nation, regardless of whether or not Trump actually ultimately carries the Commonwealth on election night.
And we should get our results from Virginia election night. Is that right?
Yeah, we should, barring, some type of Florida 2000 situation where the Commonwealth's decided by 500 votes or something like that. We should most likely know who the victor is in the Commonwealth by election night. It might be late in the night if it's close, but we should definitely go to bed knowing who carried Virginia.
So we'll learn a lot from that, even if other states are lagging behind, like Pennsylvania famously has and will this year. I want to talk not just about the presidential race, but drilling down for a moment. Virginia 7 apparently looks very good for a Republican pickup. Derek Anderson is doing very well there in that open seat. How important is that race?
That race might end up determining control of the House of Representatives. So I would say it's, top 15, top 10 most important races in the entire country right now. And you're right that Anderson has been running a relatively strong campaign from what we've seen. And the data shows this, right? Early vote turnout in the 7th district is one of the highest congressional districts in the state right now. And I think part of that energy is being driven by the fact that the western parts of the district, particularly where I live in Culpeper and Orange and Greene and Madison, the turnout there is just through the roof compared to the blue parts of Prince William County, which is really what Democrats are going to be relying on to try to hold this seat. If Anderson manages to win this district, then almost certainly Republicans are going to hold control of the House of Representatives on election night.
There's a lot at stake here, a lot at stake. What are President Trump's coattails like? To what extent is he helping or maybe hurting candidates? What is he doing for candidates like, say, Senate candidate Hung Cao?
Well, I think one of the things he's going to do for Hung Cao is he's really going to juice up turnout in Southwest Virginia and South Side. So Hung Cao's center of support is mostly geared towards Northern Virginia, right? He famously ran in 2022 in the 10th district in Loudoun and Fauquier and Prince William. And he came very close to actually flipping a seat that, quite frankly, Republicans had no business winning, which is part of the reason we nominated him this cycle, because we thought he was a strong candidate. So if Trump is able to help Hung Cao with his turnout in South Side, Southwest, the Shenandoah Valley, Central Virginia, that can really go a long way, especially if Hung Cao is able to replicate his showing from 2022 in Northern Virginia and particularly in a county like Loudoun and Prince William.
And I spoke with Hung about the University of Mary Washington poll that came out recently, some other surveys showing him a lot closer than many expected. That Mary Washington survey showed him within 6 points of Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine is clearly taking Hung Cao seriously enough to be spending money in this race, to be advertising to try and beat him. They just had a debate a week ago. What do you think of that race and how close things are?
I think it's quite telling that Tim Kaine is running ads talking about how he drives down to Abingdon. He seems to be running a campaign where he's pretending that it's still 2008, and he expects that he's going to get a whole lot of support in Southside and Southwest Virginia and the Shenandoah Valley. That's not going to happen. Tim Kaine's going to get blown out of the water in those parts of the state. I think he knows it. I think that the campaign strategies that he's running on right now, in some ways, show an act of desperation. Certainly, he's favored to win. I think that most people who are looking at this race would expect him to win, but I also believe that most people are expecting this to be much closer than it was in 2018. And I think that's what's worrying the Tim Kaine campaign right now.
Well, I like when he's sweating. That's a good thing. All right, Christian Heiens, I would be so pleased to have you back with us as the election continues. Thank you really for your time today. Appreciate that.